At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. Perfection was a fragile, tedious thing. Grand Arbiter Malachi of the hegemonic Concord understood this better than anyone. He held a whisper-thin brush, its tip heavy with sunless ink, poised over a sheet of pressed starlight pulp. Malachi drew the final stroke. The ink, a perfect black, settled like a verdict onto the parchment. The symbol for finality, Shuul, stared back at him, flawless. This act was his art, his meditation. A single imperfect line, a moment of hesitation, would ruin the entire work. Malachi was flawless. He set the brush down on its jade rest just as a holographic map of the galaxy bloomed into existence before him, a three-dimensional nebula of cold light. Sector by sector, the lights winked out. A wave of darkness swept across the spiral arms, a silent, orderly tide extinguishing the messy fires of a billion civilizations. This tide marked the culmination of his life's work, the great silence brought about by his creation, the quietus. A bioweapon of such elegant lethality it almost humbled him. Almost. The Concord deployed their weapon with the dispassionate inevitability of a collapsing star. From a million hidden positions, a billion cedar probes made a synchronized final jump into the upper atmospheres of 10 million worlds. The probes aerosolized a viral agent designed to self-replicate in any nitrogen-oxygen environment, guaranteeing total planetary coverage. No fleets, no messy bombardments, just clean, quiet, perfect completion.
"The great silence is achieved, Grand Arbiter,"
an analyst reported from a nearby console, his voice a reverent whisper.
"Nearly all targeted words have fallen silent."
A cold, clean satisfaction settled in Malachi's chest. The galaxy was finally ready for proper management, for order.
"A statistical anomaly, sir,"
the analyst added, his tone shifting from reverence to mild confusion.
"Faint chaotic transmissions still emanate from Sol System, designation G-587 in the Orion Spur. Radio wave spectrum."
A single, irritatingly persistent golden mote blinked on the map. Earth, a Class 12 death world, a cesspit of biological mayhem so virulent the survey had flagged it for lost phase cleansing from the very beginning. Its dominant species was a bipedal primate that had barely mastered fire before stumbling upon atomic fission. He reviewed the initial survey. A history of self-inflicted plagues, tectonic tantrums, and genocidal squabbles. The quietus should have been just one more disaster in a long, pathetic list. A final, messy spasm from a turbulent world, Malachi said, his voice as smooth and final as his calligraphy. Inconsequential. The chaos consumes itself. Their biology is a terminal flaw. He turned back to his pristine parchment, already contemplating the symbol for beginning. The blinking light was an off-key note in a perfect chord, a grain of sand in a flawless gear. The smudge would wipe itself clean soon enough. "The problem with scavenging alien freighters," Nico Darwin grunted, his voice a tiny rasp over the comms, "is that the aliens who built them never once considered that a guy with a jury-rigged plasma cutter and a deep-seated grudge against sensible engineering might need to pop the hood." He dangled from a magnetic grapple line, 200 meters above the shattered asphalt of what used to be Denver. Below him, the skeletal remains of a Concord cargo hauler lay wedged between the crumbling husks of skyscrapers, a silverfish speared on a concrete reef. His ship, a rusty, asymmetrical beast he called the Patchwork Pilgrim, hovered nearby, its engines coughing like a smoker on a cold morning.
"You're just mad because their wiring diagrams don't look like a Jackson Pollock painting,"
came the reply from Beth, his engineer, who monitored his vitals from the cockpit.
"It's called elegant design, Nico."
It's called a pain in my ass, Beth. He braced his boots against the freighter's hull and fired the cutter. A shower of incandescent sparks rained down. Almost through to the primary power converter. Oslo wants this thing yesterday. Says Bastion's main reactor now sounds like my stomach after military-grade chili. A new voice crackled over the open channel, sharp and laced with static and derision.
Well, well, look what the cat dragged in, gutted and left on the doorstep. If it isn't Rek Darwin, king of the junkyard.
Nico sighed. Zara, to what do I owe the displeasure? Zara Volkov's scavenger ship, the Lost Loft, a brute of a vessel bristling with bolted-on cannons, crested a nearby skyscraper. The ship was sleeker than Nico's ride, but only in the way a shark is sleeker than a crocodile.
I was in the neighborhood, heard the sweet sound of incompetence, and figured I'd say hello,
She shot back.
That's a K-series converter you're after. My client in the Salt Lake Shard will pay top ration credits for it.
Your client can eat my shorts, Nico said, his focus a laser beam as he sliced the final supports. The heavy converter groaned. Besides, you lack the right seismic dampeners to haul it. You'd shake the converter to pieces before you cleared the Rockies. He could practically hear her teeth grinding.
You think you know my rig better than I do, Darwin?
I know you prioritize guns over gear, Zara. Always have. He kicked the converter loose. The massive component swung heavily on its secondary winch. Tell you what, I'll trade you the location of an intact navigation buffer on this wreck. Your rig needs one. I can hear your nav computer screaming from here. In exchange, you give me 10 minutes to get clear. The comms went dead for a full 3 seconds, long enough for a man to question his recent choices.
You're bluffing,
She said, but her voice lacked conviction. Deck 7, aft storage behind the cryostasis pods. It has a cracked casing, but the core is solid. You're welcome. He triggered the winch, and the converter began its slow ascent toward the Patchwork Pilgrim. Pleasure doing business with you. Zara's ship hovered for a long moment. Finally, her voice returned, a low snarl.
Don't get yourself killed, Darwin. The galaxy's running low on interesting bastards, and you make my job fun.
The Lost Loft peeled away, disappearing behind the concrete canyons. As Nico watched it go, his eyes caught a glint from a collapsed warehouse across the street. Half buried in rubble was the focusing array of an industrial mining laser, a tectonic-class pulverizer, the kind of industrial-grade get-out-of-my-way tool that could core a small moon, a huge score, and utterly impossible to move with his current setup. He made a mental note of the location. Another day, another piece of the puzzle. Survival in the New World demanded knowing what you could carry and what you had to leave behind. Deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, in the fortified settlement of Bastion, Dr. Aris Thorne stared at a wall of holographic code, her reflection a pale ghost in the shimmering data. Rows of simulations, thousands of them, glowed beside her. Each one ended in the same blood-red word: failure. Sergeant Oslo Wayne stepped into her laboratory, his boots silent on the cold steel floor. He was a mountain of a man, his presence a steady, calming force in the humming activity of Bastion's command center. He set a tray with a steaming mug and a protein bar on her desk. Her entire world was compressed to the glowing glyphs on the wall. "Any progress, Doctor?" he asked, his voice a low rumble.
Progress towards insanity, maybe,
She muttered, gesturing at the wall.
The Quietus is a masterpiece of biological engineering. Elegant, efficient, a single key for a single lock. It should have worked on us. We're high metabolism, carbon-based, exactly the target profile.
She finally turned, her eyes burning with the fury of a theorist whose perfect equation was being mocked by a messy, illogical reality.
The survivors. Their immune response makes no sense. It's a riot, a scorched earth defense at the cellular level. They threw everything at the virus at once, Cytokine storms, fever spikes that should have been lethal, random protein mutations. It's the biological equivalent of carpet bombing your own house to kill a spider.
She paced the small lab, agitated.
99.9% of the time, the house vaporized and the spider still laid its eggs in the ashes. But for the 40 million who survived, the pandemonium worked. The sheer, unpredictable, messy violence of their immune response overwhelmed the plague's perfect design. But the trigger is a ghost. The reaction is a phantom I cannot grasp.
40 million humans left on the entire planet. Her failure to understand their survival felt like a death sentence for them all. Oslo offered the silence of a man who understood that some problems couldn't be solved with words. He field-stripped the bolt of his rifle, a habit that meant he was contemplating something difficult.
We have what we have, Doctor. We fight with what we have.
A sudden, sharp alarm blared through the complex, a jarring triple beat that signified an external high-priority threat. A tech's voice cut through the intercom, strained with disbelief.
Proximity alert! Single vessel, non-terrestrial, descending on a controlled trajectory. Landing vector plotted for a kill zone alpha. It's under power, still active.
Oslo's rifle bolt clicked back into place with a sound of finality. He grabbed the rifle and the tray. He pushed the protein bar into Aris's hand.
"Eat," he commanded, "and stay here."
He keyed his personal comm.
"Nico, get your rust bucket back to base. You're going to want to see this."
The hegemonic scout ship was a thing of beauty. A sleek, silver teardrop, it descended with silent grace, its anti-gravity drive leaving the air undisturbed. The ship settled in the exact center of Kill Zone Alpha, a wide, flat basin surrounded by concealed bunkers. Two figures in sterile white environmental suits emerged, their movements fluid and certain, each step placed with an unhurried confidence that spoke of absolute superiority. They carried scanners, sweeping the desolate landscape with an air of bored diligence. Hidden in a bunker carved into the rock face, Oslo Wayne watched through a pair of high-powered binoculars.
"They're arrogant,"
he murmured into his comm.
"They expect a graveyard."
He gave a quick nod to a grizzled old man hunched over a sparking console that looked like it had been salvaged from a Cold War museum. Kaz, the lost living physicist on Earth who understood how to operate the pre-plague EMP generator. Kaz was a non-expendable asset, as critical as any soldier. He gave a thumbs up, his face slick with sweat.
"Now,"
Oslo said. The world went sideways. First, a series of small charges detonated around the basin, kicking up a colossal storm of fine metallic dust, a low-tech but brutally effective countermeasure against advanced sensors. Second, Kaz slammed a comically large red button. A deep, gut-thrumming hum vibrated through the rock, and for a fraction of a second, an invisible fist of energy snuffed every unshielded electronic device in a 5-kilometer radius. The lights on the hegemonic ship and their environment suits winked out.
"Fire!"
Oslo commanded. From a dozen hidden positions, heavy-caliber rounds, each the size of a man's thumb, hammered the scout ship. They weren't energy bolts. They were bricks thrown at orbital velocity. They targeted the exposed, delicate fins of the FTL capacitor, shattering the finely tuned structures with savage kinetic force. 2 rounds caught the hegemonic scouts, punching through their useless suits and flinging them to the ground like discarded dolls. The entire engagement was over in 90 seconds. A moment later, the Patchwork Pilgrim came roaring over the ridge, its landing struts groaning in protest as it touched down. The ramp lowered and Nico Darwin strolled out, a manic grin plastered across his face. He surveyed the scene, the silent ship, the dead aliens, the smoking gun emplacements.
"Looks like you guys started the party without me,"
he called out to Oslo.
"Did you save me any cake?"
The corner of Oslo's mouth twitched.
"We saved you the presents."
He jerked his chin toward the captured ship.
"Get it open. Aris is going to want to play with your new toy."
This was how humanity fought back, with cunning, desperation, and a deep-seated refusal to lie down and die. They were too stubborn to be exterminated, and as the silent alien ship now proved, far too clever to be dismissed. Okay, seriously, who designs a door with no handle, no keypad, and no discernible seam? Nico grumbled, running a hand over the infuriatingly smooth hull of the captured scout ship. He'd named it the Up Yours. It felt appropriate. Inside the ship, now dragged deep into Bastion's main hangar, he and Aris were working feverishly. The interior was as pristine and maddening as the outside. It smelled of sterilized air and the faint, sharp scent of condescendingly advanced circuitry. Aris had a ruggedized human laptop jacked into the alien command console via a nightmarish tangle of bypass cables and alligator clips. On the main view screen, a cracked tablet running scavenged mapping software was zip-tied to the elegant alien display.
The FTL drive is fried, but the core is intact,
Aris said, pointing to a schematic on her screen.
The problem is the ignition sequence. The drive's primary capacitors require an absolutely pure power source to charge. Any fluctuation over 0.01% during the initial charge, and the containment fields will collapse. The mountain goes boom.
So our gas-guzzling generators are out, Nico stated, kicking one of the noisy machines they had wheeled in. The power they put out is filthy, full of spikes and drops.
Exactly, Aris confirmed. We can't jumpstart the engine directly, but...
She tapped a section of the schematic showing the ship's own internal power capacitors.
These are designed to hold a pure charge. If we can fill them using our dirty generators, we can use them to ignite the drive core.
Nico caught on immediately. But the dirty power could corrupt or fry their delicate systems before they even get charged. It's like trying to fill a surgical syringe from a fire hose.
That's the needle we have to thread, Aris said. We need to trickle charge their capacitors slowly, carefully, using every filter and regulator we have to clean up the power flow. It'll take hours. One significant power spike from our generators and the capacitors could blow.
For the next 4 hours they worked. The process was a perfect metaphor for their situation, carefully feeding raw, chaotic human energy into a system that abhorred it, hoping to tame it without breaking it. Nico monitored the generators, physically adjusting fuel flows and tweaking regulators, while Aris watched the charge levels build with excruciating slowness on her monitor. Finally, a green light blinked on the alien console.
They're charged, Aris breathed. Capacitors are holding stable.
Then let's light this candle, Nico said, his hand hovering over the ignition control he had wired into the system. He pressed it. A deep hum started to build, the sound of a god waking from a long slumber. The lights on the hegemonic ship glowed with a steady internal power. The angry, protesting jolt of a machine forced to operate outside its parameters was gone, replaced by the smooth, terrifying hum of a fully functional alien engine. Nico let out a whoop of triumph. Welcome to the fleet, you magnificent bastard! Aboard the Order's Zenith, Grand Arbiter Malachi reviewed the garbled final transmission from Scout Vessel 919. It was mostly static, punctuated by the unmistakable kinetic impact warnings of a projectile weapon. Then, silence. The ship's vital signs had vanished, not exploded, vanished, as if someone had simply thrown a switch. He felt a flicker of something unpleasant. He was intellectually offended. This was an impurity in the data, a discordant note in his perfect symphony. His subaltern stood waiting, expecting orders. Malachi composed himself, his face a placid surface. He dictated a formal log entry, his voice calm and measured. Scout Vessel 919 lost due to catastrophic drive core failure, likely triggered by uncharted stellar phenomenon in System Sol. Recommend follow-up sanitation detail. Classification, low priority, environmental hazard. He didn't delete the report. That would be crude. He buried the document. He filed it under a category so mind-numbingly dull and bureaucratic that months, perhaps years, would pass before anyone in Central Command bothered to review it. This calculated lie would protect his perfect record, to ensure the smudge on his masterpiece remained his secret to clean.
Send 3 destroyers.
He commanded his subaltern, turning away from the report.
Wipe the smudge clean, and be thorough this time.
The subaltern bowed and hurried away. Malachi picked up his calligraphy brush. He needed to cleanse his mind of this irritating, chaotic distraction. The day Nico flew the Up Yours into Bastion's main assembly hall would be burned into the memory of every survivor present. The sight of the captured alien vessel, its engines humming with defiant life, brought a roar of cheers that shook the very rock of the mountain. The ship was a weapon. It was a promise. In the war council that followed, Oslo Wayne's voice resonated with the calm gravity of a man forged in crisis.
This changes things. We are no longer just survivors. We are soldiers. We need every scavenger, every settler, every last human with a rifle and the will to fight.
His call was answered. The most significant arrival came a week later. Zara Volkov's The Lost Loft landed heavily in the hangar bay, its crew of hard-faced scavengers emerging to stare down Oslo's disciplined militia. The air crackled, 2 different tribes of survivors meeting for the first time. Zara met Nico at the foot of her ramp.
I got your soldier king's message, she said, her arms crossed. I'm not the saluting type, Darwin.
Nobody's asking you to salute, Nico replied. We're asking you to shoot, just in the same direction as us for a change. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the hangar, taking in the soldiers, the engineers, the Up Yours gleaming under the lights.
I'd rather die fighting them than scavenging their scraps for the rest of my life. And you're the only other idiot crazy enough to think we have a chance.
Nico grinned. Welcome to the asylum. Later that night, the 2 crews kept their distance in the crowded mess hall. Zara's people sat at one table, Oslo's at another, a tense no man's land between them. The strained quiet was broken when one of Oslo's grizzled sergeants stood, walked over to a sputtering coffee machine, and brewed a pot. He poured 2 mugs, walked to Zara's table, and set them down in front of her and her first mate without a word. Then he walked back to his own table. Zara looked at the steaming mug, then over at the sergeant, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. She picked up the mug and took a sip. The small gesture of shared humanity was more powerful than any speech. The ice was broken. 3 hegemonic destroyers, elegant blades of silver and shadow, sliced into Earth's orbit. They were beautiful, deadly, and utterly confident. Their target was a world making a bit of noise. The mission was sanitation. They never saw it coming. Nico led the attack in the Up Yours, its cobbled-together system screaming in protest. His fleet was a joke. 2 retrofitted orbital freighters with mining lasers bolted to their hulls, Zara's heavily armed Lost Loft, and a dozen single-man stingers, basically cockpits with engines and big guns strapped to them. Welcome to the boneyard, ladies and gentlemen, Nico broadcasted across the fleet's channel. They were hidden in the dense debris field of old satellites that choked Earth's orbit, a graveyard of humanity's first space age. Rules are simple. Hit 'em hard, hit 'em fast, and try not to become a permanent resident. The hegemonic destroyers moved into a standard cleansing pattern. That was their first mistake. Predictability. Zara, you're on deck, Nico ordered. Light 'em up! From behind a derelict space station, the Lost Loft unmasked its new primary weapon, the Tectonic-class industrial mining laser Nico had spotted in Denver. Zara's crew had spent weeks hauling it out and mounting it. Now, powered by 3 freighter cores wired in series, it fired. A beam of pure incandescent energy, wide as a city block, launched across the darkness. The beam was a blunt instrument. It didn't slice, it clubbed. The energy struck the lead destroyer's shields, not to pierce them, but to blind them. The overload was so immense that every sensor on the hegemonic ship flared white. At the same instant, Nico executed a maneuver that defied physics and common sense. He fired his main thrusters, sending the Up Yours into a screaming dive toward the moon. Hold on to your lunches, he yelled. The G-forces were crushing. He skimmed the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity to slingshot his ship around and up, coming in under the blinded destroyer's belly. "Stingers! Guns free! Freighters! Give 'em hell!" The tiny human fleet swarmed the disoriented destroyer. Mining lasers, railguns, and crude kinetic missiles hammered its unshielded engine section. It was like watching piranhas tear apart a whale. The destroyer shuddered, venting plasma. Before the targeted ship could go critical, Nico brought the up yours alongside a gaping hole in its hull. "Boarding party! Go, go, go!" A team of Oslo's soldiers stormed the dying ship, not to conquer it, but to scavenge. They had 90 seconds. They ripped out data cores, weapon components, and anything else that wasn't bolted down. Their prize was a single, intact Vertex-class fighter, a marvel of engineering they managed to drag out of the hangar bay with magnetic grapples just as the destroyer's core began to fail. They retreated as the hegemonic ship blossomed into a silent, white-hot flower of destruction. But the cost was staggering. The two other destroyers, recovering from the initial shock, had torn through the Stinger squadron. One of the freighters was a cloud of expanding debris. Zara's ship was heavily damaged. They had lost nearly half their fleet. It was a victory, but it felt like a funeral. There was no celebration in Bastion's hangar bay. The cavernous space was quiet, filled with the wounded, the dead, and the hollow-eyed survivors. The air carried the smells of burnt metal and antiseptic. Nico stood before the empty docking clamps where his friends' ships used to be. The names of the dead scrolled on a nearby monitor. So many. He saw the face of every pilot he'd sent out there. His usual cocky facade was gone, leaving behind something raw and exhausted. Oslo found him there, a solid presence in the grief-stricken stillness. "Half our fleet," Nico said, his voice hollow, "for one of theirs. Was it worth it, Oslo?" Oslo put a heavy hand on his shoulder.
Every one of them knew the price, Nico. They chose to pay it. Now we have to make it worth a damn.
The moment was broken by a new alert, a soft chime this time, not a blaring alarm. A sensor tech's voice came over the hangar comms, hesitant. "Sir, we have another ship. Unidentified. Non-hegemonic design. It's broadcasting a standard first contact sequence on a loop. It's asking for help." Nico and Oslo exchanged a look. The galaxy was less silent than they had thought. Grand Arbiter Malachi read the full, panicked report from his two retreating destroyers. The log was a mess of incoherent data, sensor ghosts, and terrified exclamations. It spoke of a fleet of ghosts emerging from a debris field, of a weapon that blinded their systems, of tactics so erratic and suicidal they defied all military doctrine. This was not a forgotten automated cannon. The resistance was organized, intelligent, and utterly savage. His career was on the line. The perfect record, the promotions, the prestige, all of it was about to shatter. He opened a secure channel to Concord High Command, his hand hovering over the rune to transmit the full battle log and request a proper battle fleet. He could see it now, the inquiries, the tribunals, the demotion, the shame, his flawless calligraphy ruined by a single ugly blotch. He canceled the transmission. Instead, he filed a different report. He classified the Earth incident as an engagement with rogue elements utilizing salvaged pre-extinction automated weaponry. A gross underestimation, but a plausible one. He requisitioned a specialized sanitation fleet under his personal command, a request he knew would take months to approve through the Concord's rigid, sclerotic bureaucracy. He had chosen his career over the truth. He was betting he could solve this disgusting little problem himself, quietly and permanently, before anyone discovered his lie. It was the first truly emotional, truly flawed decision Malachi had ever made. The new arrivals called themselves the Grakthul, a race of towering beings whose geology-based biology gave them carapaces like polished volcanic glass. Their ship was crippled, their people were starving, and they were the last of their kind. They had been spacefaring for millennia when humanity was still figuring out pointy sticks. The Quietus had torn through their empire in a matter of hours. Their refugee ship was one of a handful that had escaped. Oslo, against the advice of some of his more paranoid commanders, offered them sanctuary.
"We're all survivors now," he said simply. "We stand together or we fall alone."
While diplomats and engineers exchanged information, Aris Thorne was in her lab with the Grakthul's chief medical officer. She ran analysis on their biological samples, her professional curiosity overriding everything else. She pulled up the Grakthul genome on one screen, and next to it, her data on the human immune response. She stared and stared. Then, for the first time since the world ended, a slow, predatory grin spread across Aris's face. It was a terrifying sight. She practically sprinted to the command center, dragging Oslo with her. She threw the two datasets up on the main screen.
"I've been trying to build a perfect key for the hegemonic lock,"
she said, her voice electric with discovery.
"That was my mistake. I was trying to think like them. The Grakthul genome confirms it. The plague targets a specific, conserved protein sequence. But the reason some of us survived wasn't because we had a better key. It's because our immune system is a messy, hyper-competitive disaster honed by millions of years on a planet that actively tries to kill us. Our bodies responded to a perfect weapon with imperfect, overwhelming force."
Her eyes lit up with a cold, fierce joy.
"I can't build a perfect counteragent, but I don't have to. I can design a virus that's intentionally sloppy, a virus that hypermutates, that changes its shape every second. It won't be a key for the hegemonic lock. It'll be a lockpick, a skeleton key, and a crowbar all at once, hitting their biology with 1,000 different attacks simultaneously. Their rigid, perfected immune systems won't know how to fight a war on a million fronts. It's a weapon born from our greatest flaw, our chaos."
Oslo's eyes widened as he understood the implication.
"You can turn their own philosophy against them."
"I can turn our entire messy history against them,"
Aris corrected.
"and it will be beautiful."
The new human Grakthul alliance was desperate. They had people, they had will, but they lacked resources. The Grakthul, however, had intel. For centuries, they had charted the Concord's hyperlane routes. They knew of a major supply convoy scheduled to pass through a nearby nebula. It was automated, lightly defended, and full of everything they needed. Nico led a joint boarding party. His team was a chaotic mix of human soldiers in scavenged armor and Grakthul warriors with their natural plating. They breached the massive freighter's hull, and the fight was on. The zero-G combat inside the cargo bay was a ballet of brutal improvisation. The Grakthul, with their 4 arms and low center of gravity, could anchor themselves and create stable firing platforms in midair. The humans, more agile, used the floating cargo containers as cover, darting between them. Nico found himself fighting back-to-back with the Grakthul captain, a giant named Rock. A hegemonic security drone zipped around a corner, its plasma weapon charging. Nico shoved Rock down, taking cover behind his massive frame, while simultaneously firing his own rifle, blowing the drone to pieces.
"My thanks, small one,"
Rock rumbled. "Just watch my 6, big guy," Nico shot back, already moving to the next target. They took the convoy. The victory yielded FTL drives, advanced weaponry, medical supplies, and most importantly, several sealed containers of Quietus samples. Aris finally had her raw materials. It was the first victory for what the Grakthul were already calling the Unruly Alliance. The victory would not be the last. In the main War Council chamber of Bastion, Aris unveiled her masterpiece. On the central display was a rotating molecule, glowing a sickly green.
"I call it the whirlwind strain,"
she said, her voice calm and clinical.
"My hypermutating, chaotic counteragent. To deploy it effectively, we can't just release it on some colony world. We need to poison the well. We need to hit the source."
She brought up a new image, a heavily fortified moon orbited by a fleet of warships.
"This is Praxis. It's not just a military base. It's the primary bioweapon manufacturing and distribution center for the entire Concord. Every medical supply, every ship's atmospheric processor, every food ration in their network is seeded with benign marker agents from this facility for quality control. If we introduce the whirlwind strain here, it will be distributed through their entire logistical network as a trusted update. It will decapitate their command structure and trigger a systemic collapse.
The room was silent. The plan was pure human insanity.
The moon is protected by a planetary shield,
Oslo stated, pointing at the display.
impenetrable.
Not permanently, Nico said, a wild gleam in his eye. He brought up a new schematic. It was a lumbering, ugly freighter they had captured from the convoy, now stripped down and refitted. He dubbed it the Scrap Hammer. The shield has a central generator on its surface. We can't destroy it from orbit, but we can overload it. We packed this freighter with every last pre-plague nuclear warhead we salvaged from that Siberian silo. It's an all-or-nothing gamble with our only strategic weapons. The ship will fly itself on its final approach. The Vertex fighter is prepped in its cargo bay for a parasite launch. I just have to get it there.
And through that hole?
Zara asked, leaning forward.
Through that hole,
Oslo said, his voice a low growl.
I lead a ground assault. A glorious, insane distraction. We hit them so hard and so fast they won't know what to do.
And while you're making noise, Aris concluded, my team goes in, quiet, infiltrates the main lab, and delivers the package. It's a terrible plan. The odds are astronomical. It will probably get us all killed.
Nico grinned. Sounds like the most human plan ever. I love it. Alarms screamed like dying gods inside the cockpit of the Scrap Hammer. Nico wrestled with the controls, the freighter groaning under the strain of atmospheric entry and a storm of defensive fire. The surface of Praxis rushed up to meet him, a landscape of sterile gray fortresses. Final trajectory locked, the ship's computer stated calmly. Impact in 90 seconds. Nico slammed a button, engaging the final autopilot. You have the con, he grunted. He unstrapped and scrambled from the bridge. The ship shuddered violently as a plasma bolt struck its port side. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. He raced through the groaning vessel, dodging falling ceiling panels, a mad dash against time and structural collapse. He reached the cargo bay just as another impact threw him off his feet. The Vertex fighter sat in its launch cradle, canopy open. He hauled himself into the cockpit, the entire bay groaning around him. 30 seconds to impact. He strapped in, his hands a blur over the controls, initiating the launch sequence. 15 seconds. The clamps holding the fighter released. The bay doors, already buckling, were forced open. 10 seconds. Goodbye, you magnificent piece of junk, he whispered. He firewalled the thrusters. The sleek fighter shot out from the belly of the dying freighter like a bullet from a gun. For a heart-stopping second, he flew parallel to the plunging Scrap Hammer. Then his engines kicked in fully and he peeled away, the G-force trying to push him into his seat. He looked at his rear-view monitor just as the Scrap Hammer detonated. A sun was born on the surface of Praxis, a sun made of humanity's last resort. The shockwave tore a bleeding, shimmering hole in the moon's shield, a raw wound in the perfect hegemonic defenses. Through that gap, a swarm of drop pods screamed toward the surface like angry meteors. They landed hard, kicking up clouds of gray dust. Ramps slammed down, and Oslo's wrecking crew poured out, a mix of human soldiers in patched-up power armor and Grakthul warriors brandishing plasma cannons. Their ground vehicles deployed with a roar of internal combustion engines that sounded like a primal scream against the sterile silence of the moon. Armored buggies, jury-rigged with alien cannons, tore across the landscape. Motorbikes with sidecars mounting heavy repeaters weaved between them. Zara Volkov rode shotgun on a dune buggy, a salvaged hegemonic plasma repeater in her hands, a delirious grin on her face. She spotted Nico's stolen fighter streaking overhead and raised a fist. Over the comms, he saw the gesture. He dipped a wing in response, a silent nod of respect between two lunatics at the end of the world. Their mission was mayhem, a symphony of explosions and improvised violence designed to draw every eye, every gun, every defender on the moon. They were the thunder, loud and terrifying, and they played their part to perfection. Under the cover of Oslo's glorious, insane distraction, Aris's small infiltration team moved like ghosts. They slipped through a service conduit blown open by the initial blast and made their way into the heart of the bioweapon foundry. It was a cathedral to death, a vast sterile chamber filled with row upon row of glowing viral containers, humming with contained power. Hegemonic technicians in clean suits moved with silent purpose, completely unaware of the chaos raging outside. Aris's team took them down with silenced rounds. No alarms. She walked to the central control terminal and interfaced her device. Lines of alien script yielded to her custom-built decryption worms as her countervirus, the Whirlwind strain, uploaded into the master distribution network. A single line of text appeared. Upload complete. Propagating. At that moment, alarms blared across the facility. The hegemonic forces had finally realized they were being robbed.
Virus away!
Aris said calmly into her comms, her voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, even as a firefight erupted around her.
Time to go!
From the bridge of the Order's zenith, Grand Arbiter Malachi watched his perfect, orderly world collapse into utter pandemonium. The shield was down. His ground forces were being torn apart by primitives on wheeled contraptions that belched smoke. His fleet was in disarray, unsure how to respond to an enemy that fought with no discernible strategy. He saw a single stolen Vertex-class fighter zip past his viewport. The pilot, a human, turned to look directly at him and gave him a rude one-fingered salute before blasting away into the chaos. At that exact moment, his chief medical officer's voice came over the comm, trembling with a terror Malachi had never heard before.
Grand Arbiter, we have a catastrophic bioagent outbreak on Praxis. It's a variant of the Quietus, key to our own biology. It's hyper-mutating.
The blood drained from Malachi's face.
It's propagating through the primary supply network, sir,
the officer stammered.
The contamination is coming from Praxis. It's in the atmospheric processors, the calibrated sustenance dispensers, the medical auto-injectors. It's in everything!
Malachi finally understood. They had not just broken his fortress. They had turned his greatest weapon against him. They had poisoned his empire's circulatory system at its very heart. The chaos he so despised, the messy, unpredictable, emotional turmoil of the humans, was now inside his perfect, orderly machine. He looked down at his calligraphy set. His hand trembled, and the brush fell from his fingers. It struck a perfect, full inkwell, shattering it. A single, ugly black stain spread across the pristine white floor of his bridge. The symbol for finality was ruined. Months later, the hegemonic Concord was a memory. Consumed by the whirlwind plague and a dozen civil wars, its core worlds were burning. Its rigid command structure, poisoned at the source, had been decapitated, leaving a power vacuum that devoured itself. Earth's orbit was no longer a boneyard. It was a bustling, chaotic hub, a junkyard sanctuary. Ships from a dozen different survivor species, Grakthul and others they had found, others who had seen the broadcasts of the Battle of Praxis, came and went, trading, rebuilding, coexisting. Nico, Oslo, and Aris stood on a newly constructed balcony overlooking the spaceport. They watched a lumbering Grakthul freighter dock next to a sleek vessel belonging to a species of silicon-based philosophers, its crew arguing loudly with human dockworkers over landing fees. It was messy. It was loud. It was gloriously, chaotically alive. They were watching the dawn of a new, messier, but far more resilient galactic age. "You know," Nico said, leaning on the railing, "I'm almost going to miss the quiet." Oslo grunted, a sound that might have been a laugh. Aris actually smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips.
Order is overrated,
she said. The bar was called The Last Stand, and it was the loudest place in the known universe. Humans, Grakthul, and a dozen other species who had not yet been named in human language crowded together, drinking, shouting, and laughing. Nico sat at a corner table, sharing a bottle of something that smelled vaguely of jet fuel with Rock, the Graxul captain.
The stories are spreading.
Rock rumbled, his deep voice cutting through the cacophony. He raised his glass, a container the size of a bucket.
Through the refugee channels, they have a name for your people now.
Oh, yeah? Nico said, taking a sip. It burned all the way down. Something flattering, I hope, like handsome saviors of the galaxy? Rock made a chittering sound that was the Graxul equivalent of a laugh.
They are calling it the human paradox. They say you are too stubborn to quit and too clever to defeat.
Nico looked around the crowded, chaotic bar. He saw Zara arguing with a four-armed gambler over a card game. He saw Oslo sharing a quiet drink with a group of Graxul warriors. He saw Aris in a heated debate with a floating silicon-based entity about viral replication. He saw the messy, beautiful future they had all paid for in blood and scrap. A slow, tired, triumphant grin spread across his face. He raised his own glass in a toast to Rock, to the bar, to the whole damned universe. They sent us an apocalypse, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. He took a long drink. We sent it back. His gaze drifted across the beautiful, chaotic mess of the room. He saw Aris Thorne locked in a passionate debate with the floating crystalline philosopher. Her hands, once clenched in frustration over failed simulations, now moved with expressive grace as she expanded some complex point. She paused, listening to the alien's chiming response, and then threw her head back and laughed, a full, genuine sound of intellectual joy. She grabbed the alien's strange, bubbling drink, took a sip, and grimaced.
The molecular bonds are fascinatingly unstable,
she declared to the room at large.
It's also objectively terrible. I love it.
The cold theorist who had once chased perfection was gone, replaced by a woman who had found beauty in the flaws. Across the room, Oslo Wayne sat at a table wedged between his own disciplined soldiers and Zara Volkov's crew of wild-eyed scavengers. The tense no-man's land that once separated them had vanished, erased by shared battles and spilled drinks. One of Zara's pilots was recounting a story, waving his hands wildly, nearly knocking over Oslo's mug. The Oslo from Cheyenne Mountain would have corrected the man's posture. This Oslo just watched, a small, unfamiliar smile on his face. As the story reached its ridiculous punchline, a deep, rumbling laugh escaped the soldier's chest. It was the sound of a mountain finally allowing itself to relax, of a guardian who had realized his fortress was stronger with the gates thrown wide open. Rock followed Nico's gaze and made his chittering laugh again.
Your people are a contagion of the best kind, Nico Darwin. You do not just survive. You rebuild the rubble into something louder and stronger than what was there before.
Nico looked at the scene, at the alliances forged in fire, the friendships built on scrap, the future they had clawed back from the silent void. He thought of the cynical scavenger he used to be, the man who only looked out for himself. That man was a ghost, buried under the weight of 100 sacrifices and 1,000 moments of desperate longing. He lifted his glass, not just to Rock, but to everyone, to the noise, to the chaos, to the whole damn beautiful mess. To the junkyard! Nico roared over the din, and 100 voices from a dozen species roared back in agreement. This was humanity's true gift to the cosmos, their answer to the cold, sterile perfection that had sought to erase them. The defiant symphony of cracked mugs clinking together, of a dozen languages arguing over a card game, of laughter shared between old enemies, of life in all its messy, unpredictable, and unbreakable glory. The hegemony had promised the galaxy a great silence. Humanity, in their stubborn, clever paradox, had answered with a beautiful, glorious, and everlasting noise, and the galaxy was all the better for it.